The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
The beat rolls on. Oh, the beat rolls on. I told you you'd know what my situation was in the first few words of today's podcast, and you know it. Survival. Guessing a handful of you have as well. I don't know how many. Actually, I could probably guess how many because there's going to be a significant drop-off. Those of you that lost last week, you're probably not listening to this podcast, but if you are, thank you for continuing to do so, and thank you for listening all season long. I hope we got you pretty damn far in your league. Maybe we got you all the way to the end. Those of you that have survived, congratulations. The madness continues. It is so unpredictable right now. The one thing you can truly control is when you use your weekly moves. Two things you can truly control. When you use your weekly moves and how many games you can squeeze out of them. It is so mission critical because everyone that's not, top 30, whatever, is going to have a stinker. They're just going to happen. And the question is how much? How much will the stinker stink? Wayne Ellington the last couple of games is a good example of that. But that's why you had a 4-game week out of that guy. He still got you 14 3-pointers this week. Stinkers and all. This is why you maximize games. Because if you take a guy with only 3 games and you throw a stinker into the mix, it's really hard for them to come back from that. It's why you try to abandon ship on guys at particular moments during the week. Why you're always trying to squeeze an extra couple of games out of your week. I ended up winning pretty handily, despite the fact that I only got 1 game out of Zach LaVine last week, and I'm still sitting on him like a dummy. And I should have known on the podcast, I think it was on Thursday's show, when I said, maybe they'll play him in Utah. I should have known. If he skipped that Washington game, he wasn't going in Utah. Because we were talking about how you could get basically an entire week's break. Zach LaVine played in the game on the 18th, and by skipping 2 games here, he gets 8 days off between ball games. 7 days off between games, 8 days is the official time between the actual games occurring. I should have known. Now their schedule picks back up again. Chicago has a back-to-back early this week. If he doesn't play in either one of those, well, then you're probably doomed. So am I. Should have known. Played that one wrong. Still managed to hang on and win it, because here's the thing. Everybody is going to lose something at this time of the year to the weirdness. Whether it's Julius Randle is a great example of this. Julius Randle had 45 points on 20 out of 34 shooting on March 15th. Then he had 21, and then he had 30, and it looked like everything was coming up Julius. And then he went for 6 at a blowout loss in Orlando, and he had a very pedestrian 15 yesterday against Houston. And this is why you need so many games. And it's not like you were going to drop Julius Randle. He's been playing way too well, even in a 3-game week. But it's why that extra game every week is so huge. Because if somebody lays an egg, you just want to give them one more chance to not crap themselves. And we're going to keep on doing that during finals week. We're also going to break everything else down. That's all coming up in a weekend reverse chronological lightning round Monday. This is Fantasy NBA Today. I am Dan Besbris. Welcome to the show. Fantasy NBA Today is a hoop ball presentation and brought to you, as always, by Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. If you haven't tried it yet, what the hell? I'm yelling at you every day to give it a go. Just try it. Win second place in our DFS contest or buy one. Crazy though it may seem, it's incredibly affordable. It's like a lunch. It's less. Whole bag of coffee. Delicious stuff. You got to get it. Go to HawaiianIsles.com. Or, frankly, and I know that it's probably not as great I know if you go to HawaiianIsles.com, that's going straight into the Hawaiian Isles system. But you can also get it at Amazon. It's so easy. You go to Amazon.com and click and type in Hawaiian Isles into the box. It'll pop right up. So easy. Do it. At HI Kona Coffee on Twitter. We are at Dan Besbris. and at Hoopball Fantasy. The plan on today's show, Reverse Chronological Lightning Round Monday, streaming attacks here on Finals Week. And then, of course, we'll get you set up for tonight, though that'll be the most likely the shortest portion of the proceedings. So let's do this thing the old-fashioned way. And when I say that, I mean we'll start on Sunday. We'll work our way backwards through the weekend until we'll cover all 30 teams. Clippers, Knicks. Clippers beat the Knicks on the road. It took them all 4 quarters to figure it out. Landry Shamet turned his ankle in the third. What does this mean? I don't know if it means a ton. I think you'll see a little bit more Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's been playing pretty well lately. Probably deserves to be owned. But otherwise, Montrez, Gallo, Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams. It's the same group of guys. And for the Knicks, when they play a close one, DeAndre Jordan sees a few extra minutes. Mitchell Robinson is still a fantasy asset in 14 minutes. I just hope he has more than that because they have a 2-game week coming up, which means really even Mitchell Robinson is right on the cusp. I'm playing him because he's been so crazy good. And all he really needs is one game where he gets cut loose out of the 2 for it to be a devastating week in a good way. DeAndre Jordan, I don't think you can trust him in a 2-game week. You certainly can't trust Emmanuel Mudiay to hit 53% of his shots and all of his free throws. But he's rolling as long as Dennis Smith Jr.'s out. But this is the 2-game week. This is not a team you really want to mess around very much with. Cleveland at Milwaukee. Kevin Love was excellent, 20 and 19 in this ballgame. He played 31 minutes. He's looked fine since coming back from bonking his head and then the back injury. Larry Nance Jr. appears to be locked into 30 minutes. That's good news. He's usable, although, again, Cleveland, not a great schedule this week. Just 3 games, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Those are the normally the lower tied games. Tuesday's actually pretty busy this week, so it's not quite the same way. No, you're probably not trusting Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson, and because they're not a great streaming team, I don't think that's a spot where you deploy them anyway, unless your league settings require it. Eric Bledsoe, Giannis, Brook Lopez, all good. Chris Middleton missed some free throws in an odd twist. Otherwise, he was actually okay. And then we're getting the results here. The other guys from Milwaukee are just not going to be doing enough to be relevant. This was also blowouts. The minutes were a tiny bit depressed for a few of the main cogs, but one of the guys we were watching was Pat Connaughton, who was okay in this ballgame, but I don't know that he's ever going to have the usage to be truly relevant. And Milwaukee is another team with not a great schedule this week. This is a week replete with 3 gamers. The 4-game teams are the rarity now. You've got Denver. You've got both LA teams. Memphis has 4 games this week. So their schedule continues to ramp up 2, 3, 4 over the last 3. Oklahoma City is back to a 4-game week. Orlando, Portland, Sacramento, and Washington. I think it's 8, I think I just listed off. It's either 8, maybe 9 at the most out of 30. And everybody else is 3, except for the Knicks. They have 2. So there are going to be a lot of 3-gamers floating around this week, and you could end up super unlucky or super lucky, depending on if you have those guys or if you're playing against them, which makes finding the streaming guys even more important, because where last week you probably saw some teams that were getting up around 60 games logged in an unlimited daily format, you're probably not going to see much more than about a 55er this week. That's a huge deal. I mean, the difference between 62 and 60 is 2 games, but the difference between 55 and 53, still 2 games, percentage-wise, is a bigger deal. You're having a certain, run up all your numbers. It's the same thing. 1,002 games versus 1,000 is not that big of a deal. 10 games versus 8, that's a massive advantage. So the fewer games on average that are happening in a given week, the more important it actually becomes to stream slots, long stream them, and use every move to gain an extra game or more. I remember I was talking about Zach LaVine. I know he's been really good, but guess what? Chicago only has 1 game after Wednesday this week. You could pick up somebody with 3 games in that stretch. 1 move, 2 extra games. I'm not necessarily saying that would work out great for you, depending on who's on your wire, but, I mean, what if there's a Clipper floating around? What if Gilgeous-Alexander's on your wire? 3 games of Gilgeous is better than 1 of Zach LaVine. And he's not the only one. There are other examples of this, and we're going to get into it later on in the show when we're talking a little more streaming stuff. Denver got blown out in Indiana. This was a weird one. Nikola Jokic was good, and everybody else was garbage. Garbage Indiana was excellent. Bojan Bogdanovic, huge ball game. He's had a great year. Miles Turner, solid. For Indy, this was a much-needed win. They've been struggling a little bit without Darren Collison, but able to bounce back. No real fantasy news from this ball club. And on the Denver side, we are keeping an eye on them largely because they have these back-to-back 4-game weeks in the fantasy finals. They actually have another one next week, but hopefully your playoffs are over by then. The note on this one is, guys like Malik Beasley, Gary Harris has retaken his starting job. It basically happened now. And a lot of these guys were terrible. Will Barton was actually okay. Gary Harris was okay at best. Jamal Murray was not good at all. He shot 2 for 12 in this game. But Murray, Millsap, Barton, Harris, and Jokic, the 5 starters, are really the trustworthy guys on that team now. I'd love to say I put my faith in anybody else, but Monty Morris, maybe the closest. I don't think I'm doing it. Charlotte, an insane buzzer beater from Jeremy Lamb against Toronto. If you haven't seen it, you got to go watch it, because the best I could do to describe it on this thing is it was awesome. It was a fumbled inbound pass. Jeremy Lamb retrieves the ball at half court with 2 seconds left and just fires it up into the sky and drilled it. And they were down 2. I guess you could do the math when I told you they won by 1. Amazing. Charlotte is an intriguing team for you non-streamers. They have a pretty awful schedule to start this week. The Hornets only play 1 game in the first 4 days this week. Then they do have actually a pretty good schedule starting on Friday of this week and running you all the way to the end of the regular season. They actually have 8 games during the final 13 days, so that's pretty good. But the first 4 days this week are not at all. So if you have a Hornet that's a fringe asset, you should probably get rid of them. Find somebody who's playing at least twice, maybe 3 times over those 4 days, and punt them. Kemba Walker, Jeremy Lamb, those are guys you can use, obviously, in any format. The rest of these guys, because they're starting to split minutes up a little bit, are better plays later in the week. You could make an argument, if you want to get 2 games in those last 3 days and you wanted a Charlotte Hornet, Miles Bridges would be useful. He's been playing well. His minutes are trending up. Dwayne Bacon with Nick Batum out played well. Willie Hernan-Gomez is actually seeing time as the backup center right now, I think just to get a feel for what he can do. But again, if you're not streaming, you're not picking those guys up until Friday, and you're definitely not picking those guys up in a standard 9-cat. They're not trustworthy enough at all. Marc Gasol had a really nice game against Charlotte, 17, 4, and 6 with a steal and 3 blocks on 7 out of 9 shooting. This is one of his best games in Toronto, maybe the best, and arguably one of his best games since, January. Big game for Kawhi Leonard, good game for Pascal Siakam. Freddie VanVleet now is going to start to lose some of his job because of Kyle Lowry's return, and you're going to see a situation of a lot of mouths in Toronto, and you hope that you have the ones that get grub. Toronto, by the way, as long as we're going through all of these teams, they are a 3-gamer as well. A lot of them. Houston, 113, New Orleans, 90. This was a pretty easy blowout. Chris Paul, double-double. James Harden had a normal fantasy game. I mean, this was you guys know I was complaining about it. I was going against him in the league where I somehow managed to advance this week. His weekly totals are just mind-boggling. It's totally nuts. James Harden this week in a 4-game week, 177 points, 28 3-pointers, 25 boards, 23 assists, 7 steals, 4 blocks, 55 made field goals out of 110 tries. He shot 50% on that crazy volume, and he shot 91% at the free throw line on 39 made free throws. Also, somehow, only 16 turnovers. He only averaged 4 a game over that stretch. I mean, he's just like the runaway number 1 over this last little bit. And if you survived it, amazing. And if you have him, I mean, goodness. Houston, a 3-game week, though. So this looks ugly again. No, you're not trusting the Kenneth Faried stuff. This was a blowout win, so you got extra minutes down the stretch. Mostly James Harden, Chris Paul, and Clint Capella. P.J. Tucker, if you're looking for that particular stat set, 3s and steals and some rebounds, low usage, low turnovers, low volume. And then Daniel House, I've talked about it before. He's 3s only, really, and the regression stuff is due, but he does look fairly trustworthy in that particular role. Problem, again, is 3-game week and every other day. So there isn't a great way to utilize that as a stream. Anthony Davis played his 21 minutes in this one. He was alive. Frank Jackson finally had a good ball game. Was only kind of inefficient. And then the rest of the Pelicans were bad. Julius Randle was not very good. They tend to look worse when Anthony Davis is on the floor. The guy I do kind of like with the Pels is Kenrich Williams, because he could actually get you, like 10 steals in a 3-game week. And this is absolutely a specialist time of year. Their schedule is weird, though. It's not every other day. It's Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday. So if you're using a Pelican, you probably go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday with them, and that would be it. This is, again, a spot where you have to be really judicious with your pickups. San Antonio knocked off Boston behind 48 from LaMarcus Aldridge, so they didn't really need anybody else. It was nice to see Jakob Poeltl play 25 strong minutes, 6 points, 10 boards, 2 blocks. That's perfect. And it was a beatdown. And for the Celtics, they had this weird kumbaya game. Remember that, like 2 weeks ago? Now suddenly, I think they're under 500 since that time. Like they won 2 in a row, and then they're like 3-6 after that. So they got to get things sorted out. Gordon Hayward came back and doubled. He started with Al Horford and Jason Tatum out in this ball game, and that obviously played a role in the blowout loss. Would they have won it with those guys back? Tough to say. Would have been closer. Boston, 3-game week. They do have a back-to-back on Friday, Saturday, though, and I'm not going to give any thoughts on this team then, because you could see Tatum and Horford back by then, and that totally changes who plays and how much. Detroit Golden State. This was actually not quite as close a game as the 7-point final number would indicate, but it was competitive. Our Detroit streamers were not great the last couple of days. Luke Kennard started to get back going again. Langston Galloway has been, oddly, of the streamers, probably the most consistent. His 4-game week, 3 threes, then 2, then 3, then 2 again. You basically know what you're getting out of him, and it's 3-pointers and literally nothing else. And they now go back to a 3-game week, so probably a situation to punt on any fringe Detroit assets. Warriors, a 3-game week. I would expect all of their guys to go in every game. Wouldn't budget anything else accordingly. So don't expect any weird rest days. Sacramento has a 4-gamer, so if you've got some Kings, that's a good spot to be in. De'Aaron Fox is an obvious start. He had 6 steals in this one against the Lakers. Buddy Hield, who broke the Kings 3-point record. Willie Cauley-Stein has been fluctuating up and down. I don't think that I would confidently start him in a 4-game week, but if I don't have any other options, then I guess you could give it a go. Bogdan Bogdanovic has been bad lately. Harrison Barnes has been okay, but fading with Marvin Bagley back. And then Nemanja Bjelica, oddly enough, has been playing pretty good basketball, although he did not play down the stretch in this ballgame, so his minutes trended down. Still in a 4-game week, that's the luxury you have, right? Like his game yesterday's game was not great. The day before, his game was very good. He had 13, 17, and 5 with 2 threes and a couple of defensive stats. And then on Sunday, he followed it up with an 8, 6, and 2 with a steal in only 20 minutes. So it's going to bounce around a little bit. I mean, this is a tough matchup for him. He got stuck with LeBron often, and they decided they wanted to go a different direction. I think I'd be okay with rolling him out there. Although if Harry Giles does come back, that could change things a little bit. JaVale McGee rolling lately. LeBron James, when he's playing, is a great start. Kyle Kuzma. I told you guys I thought KCP would be a relatively safe play for the Lakers down the stretch, and he's basically been that. I think I could have picked him up as a streaming option, and it would have been okay. They have 4 games this week, and he's out there hoisting up shots with or without LeBron. He didn't look good against Brooklyn, but he did still have his 2 steals, and in a 4-game week, that's a useful thing. Also, by the way, Lakers' 4-game week starts on Tuesday, so if you have anybody on your team that plays on Monday and then only has 2 games the rest of the week, are there any teams like that? Brooklyn would be one of them. Philadelphia, Phoenix, Utah, any of those teams. They go on Monday, and then they'll have 2 games the rest of the week. You could drop them for a Laker or a Clipper and add 2 games to your week with 1 roster move. That's huge. That's a massive thing you could do. As I'm saying it, I'm rolling through all the rosters I have in my mind and thinking, have any of these guys? Do I have anybody? Do I have any Philadelphia 76ers? Do I have any Phoenix Suns? What can I do with these guys? Pretty sweet deal if you do. The other teams that have a game on Monday all have 4 games this week, but if any of the guys on those teams stink and you're sitting on them, that gives you another opportunity. Maybe you'd rather have 4 games out of KCP than 3 out of someone else. I just brought up the other move because it's so rare when you can make a move and add 2 games to your weekly total with 1 roster switch. This is the beauty of the long stream, man. You could use 4 moves and gain 5 or 6 games in a week. Massive, especially if you set yourself up the week before. Harder to do in the playoffs, but not impossible. So I don't know. I mean, I like KCP for what he does. 3s, scoring, a smattering of steals, assists, whatever. Percentages probably aren't going to be great. Alex Caruso has been bouncing around a lot. I know Brewski trusted him a little bit more than I did. I'm not fully sold on Caruso. He seems relatively consistent, but then games like Sunday pop up where Lance Stevenson gets 25 minutes. Lakers trying really hard to find ways to tank. Lance. Oh, Lance. I don't know, man. Talk me off that one. All right, turn the clock back to Saturday. Finished up Sunday. That was 16 of the 30 teams, so we should be able to knock them out, I think, over the weekend. Did anybody not play the weekend? Probably. Boston, Charlotte, we already talked about both of those teams. Miami, Washington, those are new ones on the list. Miami with a comeback win. Kelly Olynyk played 38 minutes despite James Johnson being around, and some of that is probably because Hassan Whiteside has basically been wiped out of the rotation. So that's intriguing. That is very intriguing. I don't know who's owned on the Miami Heat in your leagues. I really don't. They're better, seemingly, when Olynyk is playing well and seeing big minutes. Josh Richardson played better. Bam Adebayo has been amazing, so he's an obvious must-own, must-start guy. Deion Waiters has actually been scoring relatively well. The Dwayne Wade farewell tour is going okay. Goran Dragic has been wildly inconsistent. I'm very curious what happens when Justice Winslow comes back. I don't know who's actually going to get dinged here. I think James Johnson is going to lose some playing time. I would reckon you see Olynyk's minutes come down a little bit. Maybe Dragic as well if they run him at the point. Derek Jones Jr. They could come from a lot of different places. I'm very curious to see what happens. The Heat's schedule finally thins out a little bit now. This is just a 3-game week for them, so probably not the time to be exploring them for anything beyond the must-start guys. Washington, on the other hand, seems to finally have thrown in the towel. I gotta think so, right? Thomas Bryant now is seeing big-time starters minutes, and he's an obvious must-own, must-start guy. The fact that he's only 33% owned in fantasy leagues is absurd, but maybe use that to your advantage. Washington is one of the rare 4-game weeks, and it starts on Tuesday, so another spot where maybe if you want to load up on a big man, they got the Lakers, the Suns, the Jazz, and the Nuggets this week. I would think that they're going to want to deploy him against basically all of those teams. Jokic, we already saw them start him against Jokic. Suns have Ayton. Utah's got the Twin Tower front court, so he'll almost for sure see decent minutes in that one. This is shaping up to be a very big week for Thomas Bryant. And the key for you, I think, here is, do you pick him up on Monday and just take the off day? He's been that good. You know, when he's seeing these starters minutes, he's been terrific. The 2 games where he was still coming off the bench are loaded up into his last week. But if you just look at the last 2 ball games, he's 17 out of 24 from the field. That's about 70%. He's made 80% of his free throws. He's averaging 19.5 points, basically 10 rebounds a game over those games. That's some top 40 looking stuff. Can he go top 40 in a 4-game week? That's worth it to not stream, basically. That's worth it to just grab him and ride it out. But you got to know what you need, and you got to know how the numbers shake themselves out, like who on your team is droppable after that first game of the week. Anybody? Do you try to squeeze it out? What if you have guys that aren't going on Monday? Do you utilize some of your moves today to try to maximize games starting on Monday, or do you just say, you know what, really, like at this point, if I'm using a move today to drop someone with 3 games, the best I'm going to get is 4 games. It sort of doesn't matter when they occur. I'd rather get the guy that I know is going to be great. So I think he fits that bill, man. 35, 36 minutes from him is just massive. He almost, I'm going to jinx it hard here, but 35 minutes with Thomas Bryant, that's basically too big to fail. How's that for topical? 4-game week, so you can run all the fringe guys out there on this team in your weekly format. Jeff Green, Bobby Portis, Jabari Parker, Tomas Satoransky, Bradley Beal. I'd trot them all out there. Philly loses in Atlanta, but they're a pretty predictable fantasy team. Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons. Easy enough. Atlanta, they're a less obvious fantasy team. Trae Young is rolling. John Collins is playing well. Dwayne Dedmon's playing well. Torian Prince is actually playing well now, which is cool. Took him all freaking year. But then they do have some streamable guys if the schedule warrants it, and it's going to be a weird fit again. Basically, you're looking at Friday and Sunday from them, if that's even remotely relevant. Philadelphia, their schedule's spaced out this week. You could drop, if your fantasy league is ending on Sunday, you could drop whatever Sixers you have that last day. Sort of no reason to hold any of those guys with a blank at the end of the schedule, but you know, they're a pretty easy one to handicap. Minnesota wins in Memphis behind 33-23 from Karl Anthony Towns. Good Lord. Tyus Jones is an assist specialist at this point and very little else. Josh Okogie played well in this game. And quietly, his numbers have actually been pretty good since moving into the starting lineup and seeing the bigger minutes lately. They jumped up about 4 games back. He had one quiet one in there where he went for 10, 3, and 2. That was on Friday, I believe, if my dates are working. It might have been Thursday. But otherwise, 21 points, 19 points, 17, around 5 rebounds in those games, about 2 assists, a steal. He shot the ball well. To me, he's a must-own guy in non-streaming formats because Minnesota's schedule has not been very good, but he's doing a lot of cool stuff across the board that requires you take notice. Over the last week, he's number 65 since he started to play these bigger minutes. That's a big deal, and I don't think anybody's coming for him. I mean, Minnesota has shut the farm down. Everybody's done with this team. So he's scoring, he's rebounding, he's passing, steals and blocks. I don't know what his future looks like. Probably not much because assuming most of these guys are going to come back from Minnesota at some point. But Minnesota does have a pocket this week where you could throw some guys into the mix. Memphis has a 4-game week coming up, so I think I'd start Jonas Valanciunas, Mike Conley, and Delon Wright. And that's probably it. I don't know if I'd mess around with it either. Delon Wright hit some 3-pointers in that last ball game. Mike Conley would likely sit out one of that Memphis back-to-back at the end of this week, so you should get one massive Delon Wright game mixed in with 3 medium-sized ones. That's a pretty good 4-game week also. Utah, they're an easy one to handicap. 3-game week, so you're not doing any streaming. Chicago, likewise, they got clobbered in this one, and they really need Zach LaVine back. I really do think he plays in their game on Tuesday, or at least one half of that back-to-back, and he's going to go nuts because that's his shtick. Dallas blew out Golden State on Saturday. We already talked Warriors a little bit. This is a weird one. Mavericks shot 53% of the ball game and hit 21 3-pointers. Dirk Nowitzki, 21 points in his final game at Oracle. Luka Doncic triple-doubled. Ryan Brokoff, who Brewski mentioned, by the way, on that Friday pod, 17, 5, and 2. Maxi Kleba played well. Dwight Powell finally had a quiet game, but again, blowout stuff, so you got to sort of take it with a grain of salt. He still had 6 boards, 5 assists, and a steal, though. This is as good as it's going to get for the Mavs. You don't trust most of these guys. Doncic, I'm in on Kleba again, and Powell. Those are really the guys that I'm throwing at anybody on this team. Talked about Sacramento already. Phoenix is an interesting one. Tyler Johnson out, Josh Jackson out, TJ Warren out. So Mikal Bridges, his minutes stayed high. His usage tends to inch up a little bit every time someone else goes down. We're also seeing now what appears to be a healthy Richaun Holmes, his minutes creeping back up towards 20 instead of 13 or 14, and that makes him inside the top 100 again. Already mentioned the fact that Phoenix, not a great streaming schedule this week. Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. So the longest you're holding on to them if you're streaming is Monday and Wednesday. And we already talked about the fact that there's some really interesting cats playing 4 times Tuesday through Sunday. So if you have a son that's a fringy guy, like a Richaun Holmes, or, don't know who else even fits the mold on this one. I think the other guys I'd probably hang on to for their other 2 games. But you could even make an argument if you didn't need a stat that Mikal Bridges does. You could dump him on Tuesday and for someone playing 4 games. I mean, you got to go nuts, right? Finals week. We talked Detroit already. Portland, Damian Lillard's just going to do a crap ton. Seth Curry's looked very good. His minutes have trended up basically every game since CJ McCollum went down. He's a very good streamer this week with 4 games who doesn't play on Sunday. So you could just ride Curry. I mean, if you picked him up already, if you used a move on him this week, then you probably just want to run his 4 games out there and worry about your other stuff another time. I picked him up towards the tail end of last week with the intention of him going on Saturday and then giving me this 4-gamer. So I'll probably sit on him, and then he would likely be a drop on Sunday if I still have any moves left. Mo Harkless still doing his medium-sized stuff. Good to see Al-Farouq Aminu finally get back into the mix. He's been slumping a little bit. And Yusuf Nurkic, slow game. Enes Kanter doing Enes Kanter stuff. Very simple enough. There are some streaming options there, though. I mean, like Curry, Kanter, whatever. With the 4-game week, it's an opportunity to try to toss him into the mix. And finally, Friday, making sure we didn't leave any contenders out of the mix. And we did. Orlando. They're an easy one, though. Terrence Ross, Evan Fournier, who's playing better all of a sudden again, warming back up. Vooch, DJ Augustin actually playing pretty well. Jonathan Isaac's been solid. Aaron Gordon, he's, top 100 guy. So not exactly what you were hoping for, but, throw him in there, I guess. Oklahoma City didn't play over the weekend, but they're also a relatively straightforward one. Paul George, Russell Westbrook, Steven Adams are the easy decisions. Jeremy Grant as well. And then Dennis Schroeder got hot in this one against Toronto. Oklahoma City splitting that home and home with the Raptors. The Clippers and Cavs we covered. Nuggets and Knicks. San Antonio, Houston. I think we got all these guys knocked out, right? Am I missing anybody else? Brooklyn. Joe Harris heating up. D'Angelo Russell had 21 and 13. Brooklyn has a 3-game week that's fairly front-loaded. So, that's not entirely true. It's back-loaded, but not in the way you'd want. It's Monday and then Thursday, Saturday. It took me a moment to figure out exactly what those dates corresponded to. That's a rough schedule because if you have one, you're sort of stuck with them until the weekend. It's a team where if you can, I think you'd want to get out from under it. The fringy guys like a Joe Harris even, maybe deploy him tonight and then drop him for somebody with 4 games. I know he's been good, but 2 games where, he's not going to guarantee for 26 points in those games. He might go for 26 combined, and you could pick up somebody with 4 games where, all you need to do is get to 30. They need to average, 7.5, 8 points a game? They can do better than that. You can find that on the waiver wire. So again, that's why 4 games is really so much better than 2. Simple stuff like this, where you just have to do the math very quickly to know there's a move that needs to be made. That's your reverse chronological lightning round. I mentioned we were going to talk a little bit more about the streaming stuff, and I do want to spend a moment on that. So we talked about the fact that only 8 or 9 of the teams this week have 4 games. When they occur is also important, and also the simple fact is, unless you had just the easiest playoff matchup in the history of mankind, setting yourself up for this week proved to be pretty difficult because the long stream would suggest you want guys that went heavily late last week and also heavily early this week. But there were 0 teams that went Sunday, Monday. 0. Any team that had a game on Sunday waits until Tuesday to play again. So you're left with a decision. Do you sit on a guy for whatever he has coming up this week, or do you drop them all? And this is a problem because a lot of the long streaming guys that worked out really well the last 2 weeks, the Pistons would be a good example of that. They only have 3 games this week total, and none of them is tonight. They go Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Do you just get out from all of them tonight? I might actually suggest yes. None of those guys is trustworthy enough in a 3-game week. The reason they made sense was because they had 4 games, and so everything would just average out. So you got your 10 3-pointers out of Langston Galloway. You got your 14 out of Wayne Ellington. You got your whatever it was out of Luke Kennard. 4 games allows you to have those misfires. 3 doesn't. And that's why I talked for a minute or two about Thomas Bryant, where if you're sitting on a guy like a Piston or a Hornet or one of these teams that had 4 games last week with an interesting schedule build, you're in a weird spot. There are a couple of teams where there's some nice carryover. Denver had a good schedule late last week, and they have a 4-gamer this week, so you could probably just sit on them the rest of the way. Sacramento, likewise. They had a good schedule late last week and also a 4-game week, so you just ride those guys through. The other teams, Utah had 4 games last week that was sort of center-loaded. They were like a hamburger of games. Same with Washington. Utah only has 3 games. Washington does have 4, but that meant you also needed to hang on to them for the fact that they only had 1 game over the weekend. You might not have done that. Other teams that were interesting sort of late week selections. Golden State had a back-to-back over the weekend. They go only 3 times this week, and it's all later in the week. Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. Boston had a back-to-back over the weekend. They only have a 3-game week. So a lot of these teams that had nice schedules late last week, they segue into clunky ones this week. I thought last week was probably the toughest. To me, okay, this is a better way to describe it. I think that the 3 weeks of the playoffs, streaming got tougher each week. The first week was easy because you could set yourself up during a non-playoff week. Presumably you were safely in some capacity, whether a bye or not, it doesn't matter. Let's assume you didn't have a bye. But for the quarterfinals, the first round of the playoffs, unless you were fighting for that last spot, you should have been able to use some moves the previous week to set yourself up. Remember we talked about the Cavs and the Clippers. They had that really nice starting playoff schedule. And then you could just build from there into various teams like the Heat, the Bulls, that had a nice schedule over that first weekend. The Pistons had a good schedule over the weekend that transitioned into a 4-game week. I mentioned the Heat. They had that I already forgot what it was, like 6 games and 9 nights or something like that. They had a good one that rolled out. They had a 5 and 7 mixed in there. That was easy. That situation doesn't really present itself going into this finals week. The heaviest schedules probably belong to, well, I guess it'd be Sacramento, because they had a back-to-back, and then they have 4 games this week. So they go 6 games in 9 days, starting on Saturday. So you're probably just riding that one through for a long stream. And then Denver, because they had 3 games in 4 days to end last week, and then 4 games this week. So they ended up with 7 games over 11 days. But it's not that great of a grab if your guy isn't a great ball player. Detroit, I mentioned a team that had a good schedule at the end of last week. They transitioned to a bad one. So what you probably need to make the decision of here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that most of you maybe used one move to prepare for this week. I did. I got out from under my Knicks late last week and traded him in at the dealership for a Portland Trailblazer. My Knick had a game on Sunday. My Blazer had a guy on Saturday. That was a 1-to-1 swap. I didn't gain a game last week, but I set myself up to gain 2 games this week. So I'm a +2 on that move. I needed to make sure I got through last week to use it. I felt confident enough that I could use one move to prepare for the finals last week. It was a ballsy decision. Make no mistake. I don't know that all of you guys could do it or even some of you guys could do it, but I'm going to assume that we all were, those of you that survived, and that's probably those of you that are still listening, were in decent enough shape where you were like, you know what, I think I'm okay. I think I'm going to use one move to prepare myself for this week. Which means the Besbris long streaming method, which generally has 3 streaming slots for 4 moves, basically N-1 is what we've been working with. I'm still stuck with 2 or 3 other streaming slots. I would even say 3 other ones on mine. So it wasn't even N-1. It was basically N for me. 4 moves, 4 streaming slots. Because some of them are going for 4 or 5 days, and that means that they carry over from week to week. So my guys right now, and I don't know if you guys should just think about your own players, okay? There's been criticism that sometimes I talk about my own team too much. So I just want you guys to draw the parallel on this. I have 3 guys on my team. I have Seth Curry, who's not one of them, that I'm just going to hold on to. He's a streaming slot, effectively, because I'm totally willing to part with him at a moment's notice, but I'm not planning on it, at least until Sunday. I have 3 other guys on my team where I'm anxiously considering getting rid of them. Nemanja Bjelica, Langston Galloway, and Wayne Ellington. Those are the 3 on my team. You probably have different guys. Maybe there's some overlap. There's a lot of streaming options out there. Miles Bridges on the Hornets is one of them. Other guys on the Hornets. You get the idea. I don't think I can afford to use 3 of my 4 moves today. It sets yourself up for failure. If anybody gets hurt on your team, you got to use your 4th move. Boom, you're out of moves. That's one way it could all fall apart. What if the week goes strange? I mean, basketball, like many sports, you're dealing with small sample size, especially here in a 1-week sample size. What if your guy that you rely on, who generally averages 22 points a game, averages 12 points a game this week? Aren't you going to wish that you had some moves around to try to buttress the point loss? To go pick up somebody who's a scorer predominantly? Or a different category? I don't care. Apply this to any of the 9 categories in your league. You have a guy that normally blocks shots that just doesn't this week. It'd be really nice if you had a roster move or 2 on Friday to say, ugh, man, my blocks are not there. I got to go pick up a blocks guy who plays twice Friday through Sunday. And there are plenty of teams that go twice over the weekend. But if you use 3 roster moves on Monday, you've only got 1 left. Anything could go wrong. So I'm inclined to say the most moves you should ever make at the beginning of a week is 2. And then you better damn well hope that you're hanging on to those moves at least until the middle of the week. I would try very hard, outside of an emergency where one of your guys basically just gets ruled out for the year or the week, because that's all that matters at this point in head-to-head. I would try very hard to hang on to the rest of your moves until Wednesday or Thursday at the earliest. Maybe use 1 on Wednesday or Thursday and save 1 for Friday when you're looking for that last category. Who fits that bill? Well, Magic, they have a good early week schedule. Memphis, they have 4 games this week. That's front and back end. They go on Monday, but at least they go Monday, Wednesday. So if you really wanted to, you could move off of them on Thursday. Oklahoma City, they go every other day this week. Portland, we just mentioned a moment ago, and that's it in terms of teams that go on Monday. And that leaves you very few options. Portland, we already talked about. Seth Curry is an option as a streaming guy, and as Cantor if he's not picked up. Orlando, there really isn't one. Most of those guys are probably owned in your league. Closest thing I would think would be DJ Augustine if he's available. He's probably not. Memphis still on right, but I don't think you're dropping them. If you're picking up a Grizz, you're probably holding them out for the week. And therein lies this is the rub, right? If you picked up, say, Enes Kanter on Portland, that's an actual stream. Because on Sunday, you're probably thinking, this is a guy I'd kind of like to get rid of at some point later on this week. I'm not really married to him going all 4. That's a stream where you're thinking, I should save 1 other roster move to change this guy later in the week. If you picked up DJ Augustine or DeLon Wright or one of these dudes who goes on Monday that also has 3 more games the rest of the week, there's no difference in picking up someone with 4 games who starts on Tuesday. It's 4 games regardless. The only reason to use your move for a guy playing tonight is because you'd want to get out from under them midway through the week, even as early as tomorrow. For instance, Portland and Washington both go twice by Wednesday. It doesn't matter which of those 2 teams you'd stream from. If you were picking up Enes Kanter, but you actually wanted a Washington Wizard, you should just go get him on Tuesday. If you picked up Seth Curry and you want to hold him for the whole week, okay, that makes sense because Sunday's off. But what about a Memphis player? If you were picking up DeLon Wright and planning to hold him all the way through his 4 games on Sunday, that's the exact same number of games as if you picked up a Wizard or a Sacramento King or a Laker or a Clipper or any one of these. The Nuggets also in that mix. Any one of these teams that goes 4 games starting on Tuesday. So be judicious with your selections and don't feel like you necessarily have to pick up somebody who's going tonight to maximize games this week. Because you probably will have someone on your team who's super important even, who doesn't play on Sunday. You don't need to pick up someone who plays 2 games to start the week. You can use these moves all on Sunday if you wanted to. Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, Denver, Golden State, Clippers, Lakers, Grizzlies, Milwaukee, New Orleans, Oklahoma City, Sacramento, San Antonio, Washington. 14 out of the 30 teams play on Sunday. There are going to be plenty of guys you could pick up. In fact, probably some good ones that get dropped some point this week or had already been dropped from teams that are just scuffling and flailing. It might even be you or your opponent. You go pick up the guy you already dropped. This is the argument to be made for a guy like Thomas Bryant. This is the argument to be made for a guy like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Even though they don't go tonight, they go 4 games this week. So you're probably going to gain a game. The only other reason to wait would be if you have somebody on your team, a streamer already, who's playing tonight and only has 2 or 3 games the rest of the week, which is anybody that's playing tonight. So if you're already sitting on, say, I have Seth Curry, who I picked up last week. Maybe I don't want to hold him for the whole week. Maybe I'll drop him for one of those guys I just mentioned on Tuesday to get an extra game for the rest of the week. But it comes down to whether or not you want 4 out of Seth Curry and then 1 out of someone else on Sunday, or 1 out of Seth Curry and 4 out of someone else starting on Tuesday. Here's my argument for the former. In one way, you know what guy you should pick up. In the other, you're working on guesses. And what I mean by that is, if you wait until Sunday, you know damn well the categories you're going to be hunting. If you make your move on Tuesday, the 3rd move of the week, remember we're already making 2 moves today on Monday, you're picking up someone, KCP, Shai, whatever, and you're thinking, damn, I really hope I need the categories these guys are about to give me. And that's why I would suggest 2 moves between today and tomorrow, max. The rest, you better save for the end of the week. And you don't have to save until Sunday. You could do it on Friday. Get 2 games out of somebody where you're stat hunting a little bit. You'll have a pretty good idea what you're going to be competing in on Friday, I would think. But you don't really know. You have an idea, but you don't really know by Tuesday. So be judicious. Make the right moves. We'll keep talking about streaming stuff on this podcast. Make no mistake, we're going to walk us through the end of this thing. And, of course, we're talking about 9-cat stuff, too. We got that slipped in because, obviously, we're roto hunting at the end of the year, trying to attack those categories for some ROI. And that'll do it for our Monday show. By the way, Brew mentioned on Friday, and I'll mention it again here, we're looking for a programmer or 2 or 3. If you got some programming background, you want to come help build up Hoopball, again, it's very much a starter spot. We're not bringing anybody in to run the program here. There's some possible training involved. It's really cool. And we're right at the ground floor, and things are very close to taking off. But that's the new thing we're looking for. Here's the thing. You can see right through me on this one. I know nothing about computer programming, so that's why I'm talking about it in very vague terms. Whereas, at least with the blurbing, when I'm out there like, hey, we're looking for blurbers, I can tell you exactly what that means. And by the way, thank you to everybody that applied for those positions. We've basically filled up, I think, all of the spots. There might be 1 left. So if you're stragglers thinking about it, you can still hit me up on Twitter at Dan Besbris. But again, I know almost nothing about the programming side of this operation. I know that Hoopball is looking for neophyte programmers to sort of test their mettle and learn and also build some stuff on the inside under some people that have a better idea what they're doing. And again, that's as much as I know on the technical side. I'm pretty good with computers, but not computer programming. That's 1 click beyond. So hit me up at Dan Besbris. If you have something there, I will likely pass you straight on to somebody who has any idea what they're talking about, but I can be your point of contact. Thank you for listening, everybody. This was Monday's edition of Fantasy NBA Today, brought to you by Hoopball and Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. I am Dan Besbris. I've said that 1,000 times because I kept giving my Twitter handle out. Hit me up, as I mentioned, if you want to get involved, and rate and review the pod before the season ends. Those of you that have been sticking with us throughout, I'm guessing there are going to be fewer of you. As I look at the listenership numbers, it'll be that moment where I shed a single tear for those that have fallen, and obviously continue to celebrate those that power on. Let's do this thing, guys. 7 days to go in the head-to-head season, and only about 10 more than that in the entire season. We're almost done. It's crazy. I'm ready for a little bit of a breather. And then also, I'm also ready to do another fantasy draft. We're all sick. Have a great Monday, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.